Hello, welcome to Good Questions, Good Answer. Today we have quite interesting question from our audience that's gonna be starting in our topic today. Well, Venerable Sander, how are you over there? Are you still alive and well?
Yes, I'm alive and kicking. No, I'm quite fine. Thank you.
So,
Yes, and
well,
thank you for having me.
thank you very much for joining us again and helping to find the solution, good answer for our audience to live in their happy life at this time of COVID-19. Well, since many people now has been living close together, maybe too close, many times, many days now, so therefore, sometimes when they are close together, conflict may be arise. Usually people start the conflict by showing their opinion is correct. So that is bring to our question today. Why people want to make others believe what they believe? So, Venerable Sander, how about giving us some ideas, enlightenment?
Yes, this is a very difficult topic. When we are living together with other people, right now, people living close together, many times this may lead to some conflict, differences of opinion. Also, it's not unusual in religious circles that we have this as well. We have different opinions about what is right and how we should spread Buddhism, for example, or teach Buddhism, even though we all have the same aims, the same interest in Buddhism, but we have different details as to how it should be done. So how it should be practiced. So this is something that is a widespread problem. But even in the time of the Buddha, this problem existed.
You see, when people are believe that they are correct, they try to enforce this into others. Well, as you mentioned, the story in the time of the Buddha, maybe we could go along with that.
There is sometimes the case when somebody was very close to the Buddha, he would be led by his ego. This was especially the case in the case of the Venerable Shana, who was used to be the charioteer. So he was very close to the Buddha, and he became a monk afterwards. And then he kind of considered that he was the important man because he was the one who had brought the Buddha to his enlightenment. So when he was feeling very big and important, then as a result, afterwards, just before the Buddha passed away into nirvana, he said, we should censor Shana. In other words, we should punish him by not letting anyone speak to him at all, and he should be completely ignored. And that was a very heavy punishment, and eventually this led Shana to realize the error of his ways, and then eventually he asked for forgiveness from the other monks, and then the punishment was cancelled. So this was a way that people trained each other in the time of the Buddha, when some monks were too much led by their ego. But these are not exactly differences of opinion, but it was an example of how sometimes somebody could attach very strongly to a certain sense of being better than others.
I see. So when people are having such high ego, they only want to believe that they are important and also believe that their idea are the right one and the only one and correct. It's kind of like they believe that what they believe is the only truth. But in fact, the truth can be only one. The other may not be the whole truth.
Right.
I heard the story about this, the elephants and the blind people. It is one that are kind of like showing how the people believe what they believe, and in fact it's not necessarily true at all, because they only seen just only part of it, not the whole truth.
This story is widely known in Thailand. So in the time of the Buddha, this story, I should say, exists all over the world.
Oh.
So the listeners might know this story from their own country or their own culture, which is not a Buddhist country or culture, the story. But the Buddha, he simply told the story as an example. So he said, there is a king, right? And this king, he wants to be amused. he had a few blind people who were born blind come together and gather in a square, and he put a large elephant there. And then he asked all the blind people, can you please touch this animal and tell me what you feel? And we can play a game of guessing, and everyone will guess what he's feeling. And then the blind people, of course, they touched the elephant at different places. And one of them said, it's this.
Okay.
The other person said, no, it's that. And then everyone has a different opinion of what kind of object it was. Some people thought it was an agricultural object, like used in farming. Another person thought, no, it's a cooking material. Another person thought, no, it's a big granary, a big storage room or something like that. Everyone thought it's something different, but nobody knew that it was an elephant because nobody had ever seen an elephant. They were blind and they'd never been in the court. So they have never seen such an animal. So they could feel and feel and feel, and then they had differences of opinion, and they started to fight amongst themselves. And they started to fight very aggressively, and eventually the king was very amused by that.
I see.
So nobody was able to guess that it was an elephant, but each of them has their own opinion, and then they fight amongst themselves who was the right person. The king was amused, and the Buddha, he told this story to show that we all seem to think that we know the truth. But often our thoughts and opinions, they come from our intellect, our thinking, and that is not really the truth yet. It's just an opinion, a view on the matters.
The people normally have their own, what's in their mind, the own image that they thought in their opinion. So this is why the people at this time having this kind of difficulty try to accept, because they have their own opinion and try to enforce that into other. So in this case, is there any solution to help solving this problem for the people who are facing such difficulty living such people at this time?
As I mentioned in a previous session that we did together about living with difficult people, it's important that we first understand the other person by living together, working with them, and also to see them in times of hardship. And sometimes we need to have a good talk with somebody, good conversation, to know what kind of wisdom they have. So these are all examples of how we can know each other people. But to live together, we need patience, and we need to be able to understand that we cannot possibly always be right. And so stories like the story of Chana, that story shows very clearly, and there are more stories than that, about how to realize that we are not always right.
So since we are not always right, we have to be able to understand other and accept them too. Is there any suggestion how can we help each other by accepting them?
One of the qualities of what is also known in Buddhism as a good friend, or Kalyana Mitta, is that you have to be patient in listening to others. This involves being patient towards criticism.
Yes.
And it also involves being patient towards understanding the other person. So you try to understand the other person to be able to give good advice to the other person. If you don't have that, then you cannot give any advice. But when the Buddha talked about giving advice to other people, giving one's opinion for that matter, he always said that we should first know ourselves, whether we have already been able to understand the Buddhist wisdom and the discipline, the practice of that wisdom well enough, and whether we are already free from blame, or whether we maybe have some mistakes that we need to fix in ourselves before we start to teach other people. So the Buddha, he would always emphasize very much that we teach ourselves first, and then only when we are ready to start teaching other people. In practice, of course, this goes hand in hand, but we should never forget ourselves. And so this story is important, like the story of Channa. But it's also a story of the time of the Buddha, who was known as the blank scripture monk. well, there's different names, different translations, but you could say the blank scripture monk. That's how he's called in Thai language. He was very understood the Buddhist teaching very well, and he taught a lot about it. So the Buddha thought of him as a sort of person who teach a lot of theory, but is not able to practice that theory himself very well. So every time he called upon him, the Buddha, he said, well, blank scripture monk, can you come please? Can you sit down please? Can you go please? And every time he dismissed him or he let him come, he would call him blank scripture monk, until that monk realized, oh, I'm really at fault here. I really haven't accomplished anything. I'm just teaching and teaching others, but I never teach myself. Eventually, he realized the error of his ways, and he started to look for a teacher. And first he would go to his fellow monks, because he probably didn't want to burden the Buddha. So he went to see his fellow monks, and it turns out that he went to see a very senior monk first. But the senior monk, he knew that this monk, this very theoretical monk, he had to be humbled first before he could be taught. So we had to humble his pride to make sure that he was more humble. So he asked his monk next in line, the less senior monk, to teach instead. He said, you should go to see that monk. And then that monk said, you should go to see that monk. And every time he went to see to another monk, he went to go to another monk. Every time it was a younger and younger and younger monk. And of course he felt very ashamed of himself that he had to see all these monks to get some wisdom and to understand his life better. And then people said to him, you have to see that little novice there, which was just a young child who was ordained as a novice. And this child, he said to him, I can teach you. And then he said, please help me because I'm very desperate. The Buddha always calls me blank scripture monk, and I feel my life I have to change my life. But first, before he could teach that, he said, you should stand in the water. Only then will I teach you. So he had to, that very senior, very experienced teaching monk, he had to stand in the water until his chest. So he was very humbled. And only then that the little novice teach him. And then eventually he did become enlightened.
I see.
Because he had been humbled so much. So this example shows that no one is ever completely right. And like the British poet Sachs, about the story with the elephant and the blind, he said, each of them was right, but all of them were in the wrong. So you could say that sometimes we all have some part of the truth, which is right, but it's not the entire truth, and therefore we are failing to understand the entire truth.
Oh, that's quite true, because such people who having this kind of ideas or having that thought is the only idea that is correct or the truth, sometimes they have a lot of high ego, and it's quite difficult to also make them change the other ways around. So it is not a good idea in order to try to change their opinion or change them. But it's better in this way to just listen and also allow them to explain and give opportunity to show their view, their understanding. When they eventually doing like this repeatedly, just like this monk, finally realize what the Buddha meant, he tried to correct himself, but he has too much ego. So in the end, he just had to look for someone who giving him guidance. But giving the guidance right away cannot, because his ego are not just only instantly removed after he has been having such a teacher or the master for many months who had been asking. So in the end, finally, he has to ask for the help from the young novice, just like you mentioned. And this is one of the thing. However, there are some way can we qualify such a people like this, so this way we can know how to approach and listen to them rather than try to correct them and change their opinion, or try to change ourselves by they are forcing their opinion upon us. Is there any way to qualify them for meeting such people like this?
Yeah, well, we need to know whenever we are approaching somebody and we have a difference in opinion, whether we are in the position and whether we have enough experience, sufficient experience and knowledge to be able to raise ourselves in the position of being a teacher or a guide for the other person. We should really critically look at ourselves before we take upon ourselves a position like that. But
So,
sometimes we do need to advise each other. We need to learn from each other, so that's important. But it's important that we also not forget ourselves, and that is, I think, what these stories illustrate very clearly. It's important that we realize that it's very difficult to know yourself. We will be like a fish that has been thrown out of the water and onto the land, and then we struggle to get back into the water, to get back to our habits. So sometimes it's very hard to look at ourselves critically because we do not have a mirror all the time. So those who can be our best mirrors sometimes are the people around us that love and respect us and are also able to advise us.
you were suggesting that for those who are thought that they know everything, but in fact, what they know may not be the truth, you just need to accept that. You don't know what you don't know. Don't try to force yourself and show your ego. So this is something that can also helping us moving on by facing such difficult people like this in our life. Rather than just try to change them, we can just listen to them. And sometimes if they realize what they don't know, maybe it could be a good time for us to give them advice, be a good friend, giving them some guidance. But yes, sometimes we just need to wait, be patient, rather than just try to change them. It is better to just be an open mind and listening to them. And this is one of the way to help us confront and get along with situation or the people like this when they come into our time of our life. Well,
Yes, the Buddha, he sometimes he waited for a very long time before he advised somebody. So even somebody who is so enlightened and such a perfect teacher could not always teach everyone on every single moment. There had to be some time that was appropriate for that person. Or as our teacher and abbot, Longpa Dhammachayo, often says, when we advise somebody, we should look at the timing, but also at their moods and feelings at that moment. If we understand the other person well, then we can better be there for somebody, give them advice, if such advice is at all appropriate.
Well, this kind of reminds me of the story about the Buddha, the monkey and elephant.
Yeah, that story is actually very widely known in the Buddhist tradition. This story is very important. It's a story of what is basically known as the monks of Kosambi. And in Kosambi, there were two groups of monks, those who adhered to the Buddhist teachings in terms of the wisdom, and the other groups of monks that adhered to the Buddhist teaching in terms of discipline. And there was one of them that made the mistake when he was going to the bathroom. So he did not properly finish the bathroom before he left it. And then another monk, the rule monk, he came and said, it's a mistake, you have to confess it to another monk. And then he said, oh, I'm sorry, I will confess it straight away. But then the other said, no, you don't have to do that if you didn't intend to, if it was not disrespectful. And so eventually there didn't seem to be any issue at all. But then each of those teachers, they started to talk about the story to their students. And then instead of those two teachers were okay at first. They were not in a fight. But then the students, they started to fight. So you've got the rules monks, and then you've got the teaching monks, and then they started to fight. The teaching monks, they said that the rules monks, they just know about the rules, they don't really understand the Buddhist teaching. And the rules monks, they said, the teaching monks, they don't know anything about the rules, they're very undisciplined. So eventually they started to fight amongst themselves, and they didn't want to meet anymore. When they had ceremonies, they separated. So this is what we call in Buddhism a schism. And it was a very serious thing. It was the first time it happened in Buddhist history. So the Buddha came and tried to teach and told them that you should go, you should forgive each other, you shouldn't take it all that serious, it's just a minor offense. And then it turns out that even though both groups respected the Buddha very much, they were not able to come to reconcile. They were not able to forgive and understand each other because they were so involved in this conflict that they even gave more importance to this conflict than the Buddha himself. So they refused to change. They simply said, ask the Buddha, please go somewhere else because we cannot follow your teaching anymore. We are so involved in this conflict. So eventually these two groups, they were so separated and they caused so many problems to the Buddhist community that the Buddha decided to disappear from the world for 3 months. He disappeared into a forest where he was only maintained by an elephant and a monkey. These were the two that took care of the Buddha. So there was no single human being that was with the Buddha at that time. And you can see this in many paintings and sculptures in Thailand where you see an elephant and a monkey taking care of the Buddha.
Yeah, that's a very nice one.
Right. And then this story shows that basically just for these two groups of monks having a conflict caused Buddhism to be paused for 3 months. Like they pushed the pause button and the Buddha stopped teaching for 3 months. You can imagine how many people who could have become enlightened in those 3 months because they had a conflict, because they were not able to understand the other person's view, opinion. Then the Buddhism was paused. Because of course the Buddha disappeared for 3 months or perhaps even a little longer, we don't know exactly. But because of that, it was such a serious issue that everyone started to ban these monks. Nobody wanted to support them anymore. Nobody wanted to give any food to them. Nobody wanted to help them anymore. So these monks, they basically starved. And they almost starved to death. Eventually they had to become friends again just to survive. Because they were completely ignored by the rest of the community. Nobody wanted to help them anymore. So eventually, because of the decision of the Buddha to withdraw from the world into the forest, then eventually these two monks, these two groups had to reconcile their differences and understand each other. And because of that, eventually Buddhism was made whole again and there was no conflict left. And because of the wisdom of the Buddha, he did not force the monks directly to shake hands, so to speak, but he used the wisdom of a good leader by going into the forest, and then eventually the monks were boycotted by everyone. So this story shows that even a minor difference like cleaning up the bathroom, how you clean up the bathroom can cause people to have a conflict, just like in the book Gulliver's Travels. There's two countries that have a war just because one country eats an egg in a different way than the other country. It's a similar idea.
So that's the beliefs, the cultures and the difference. These are something that need to be very careful because they are very delicate and also just causing dispute or conflict while we are living together. So if we know who are we talking with, it is just better to accept their own character, and that's all. If they do something that we don't like, rather than just try to agree or fighting back, it is better to just let it be and let it go, just like the Buddha once did when he secluded himself. Let it be, and eventually they become settled down by themselves. And that's sometimes also leading that conversation that we are discussing. Sometimes if it's just too strong, cannot just agree or cannot just try to settle it down. Don't let this destroy our relationship. So this is one thing that we should be cherished, because you see, we've been living together for a long time. It should be just end by having this kind of conversation or some dispute that could destroy our relationship together when we are living
Right.
in time of closing like this for our shutdown like now. So everyone, I think this could be a good answer and good mindset to help you understand and accept each other while living together in time of COVID-19 and also in the future as well when we have to live together for a long time. So let it go and let it be while we are living together. This is one of the character that can help us prolong our relationship by living together. And so everyone, thank you for watching our good questions, good answer. And thank you Venerable Sander for joining us and help us solve the problem today. And we hope to see you
Thank
again
you.
next time
Thank
in
you.
our next question.